My guest today is returning to the podcast, despite my best efforts to have him banned. The last time we were here, we talked about the evolution of the ion and had hoped to discuss today's topic. But as usual, when you get talking to my guest, you quickly lose track of time. The discussion flows easy with my guest. He's probably the second most knowledgeable person on our local municipal scene. He and I both know who is first, and it's not me. Among his many local accomplishments, my guest today was a former City of Kitchener councillor from 1988 to 1994, and he was a regional councillor from 1991 to 1994. But it's his experience at the Region of Waterloo as Director of Communications from 2000 to his retirement in 2020 that will be the focus of our discussion today. And that is just a fraction of his experience in or connected to Waterloo Region. His resume reads like a local historical document itself. I think I'll send it over to the Grace Schmidt room at the Kitchener Public Library. It's always an extreme pleasure for me to have an opportunity to speak with my guest today. I'm delighted to welcome my friend, Bryan Stortz, to another edition of the Old Grey Mares podcast. How's retirement going?
It's been very quiet. That's why I appreciate these outings that you invite me on every couple of weeks.
Hey, no problem. I'm sure it's quiet for a little while. A guy like you could have no amount of things to do in our local community. And maybe there'll be a federal or provincial election sometime soon, and that'll get you out of the house as well.
Yeah, let's hope.
But last time we were together, you and I had a good long discussion about ION and some of the elements that went into the development of that and the process. And we wanted to talk about, the pandemic and COVID and the regional response. But I soon realized there's a whole lot more to that with quite the history to it that would be a show unto itself. And that's basically what we're going to talk about today is that. And taking a look as far back as, for example, SARS in the region. So why don't you tell us a little bit, and again, we're just going to ramble along here and I'll try and keep it in some chronological order, but let's go back to the early days and why don't you just jump into it and tell me what it was like at the region?
Yeah, so I guess you mentioned SARS and the arrival of SARS in Canada took place in 2003. There was a case from China that made its way to Scarborough Grace Hospital. So that was really the start of SARS here at Canada. It really, thankfully, didn't make its way to Waterloo Region or really outside of the Toronto area. In light of it was more the nature of the virus and the fact that thankfully it didn't escape that hospital setting. Right. But what it did do though was it was a wake up call to the province and probably other parts of Canada to actually start thinking about planning for the day that something like that would arrive here on our doorstep. We did during SARS have a meeting of the region's the emergency control group. And it was really at that time just to get all the players in the room at the same time to basically steady everybody down and just sort of recognize the roles and responsibilities locally. So we did actually have a meeting of the control group back in 2003, but SARS never found its way here, thankfully. What did happen though was that the province sent out guidance to municipalities and public health units across Ontario to start planning for, again, the day that there is some form of a pandemic. Right. And we started that work in 2004.
So, look, we had, AIDS was an issue in the 80s. I'm just trying to think of sort of pandemic type circumstances or events that occurred prior to SARS that would have maybe had the region on alert or local municipal governments on alert to having something in place just in case, because we're well familiar now about the Spanish flu and 1918 and all of that, and I guess a lot of this that we're going through now is being compared mostly to that period of time. But before SARS, you mentioned this emergency control group. What was the emergency control group?
Well, every municipality is required to do emergency planning. So at the regional level, we have a control group that's charged with overseeing emergencies when they come up. And we, for example, we convened that group during the blackout in, I guess it was a couple of years later when we had the blackout, I guess it was in '03. So
Oh, right.
it's a group that's been around for a while. And it continues to this day in that form, but also currently there is a pandemic control group, which I can speak to later. But I think prior to '03, there were, there was planning for emergencies, but as you said, we haven't had a global pandemic since the Spanish flu. So I can't say, before my time at the region what planning was done, but there was emergency planning done, but I don't think specifically focused on a pandemic type event.
So when you came in 2000, I mean, there would have been an emergency control group set up at that time. Would that consist of representatives from each of the municipalities in the region and social agencies or the hospitals? What did it comprise of?
The control group is under provincial, I guess, legislation or direction. Every municipality is required to have some form of a control group. At the regional level, it's the and for the purpose of this conversation, it's the regional chair and the mayors and the CAOs that form the control group. Again, that is now the basis of the pandemic control group. And then there are other individuals that are part of that. There's a hydro coordinator. There's there are a number of folks that take on roles. We have paramedic services represented. We have the chief of police. So that's the overall planning body that at the regional level we would bring together. Area municipalities would have something similar to deal with an event that would take place within their municipality. You as mayor obviously would have had one, or when you were mayor, for North Dumfries. But at the regional level, it's a broad group. I sat on it as the director of communications, and we were there to really sort of, on extreme events to be brought together. But to be honest, we did not meet that frequently because
Right.
often a lot of the events that came forward were of more of a routine nature and could be dealt with, again, by staff at a more of a tactical level rather than having to bring together the broader control group.
So what sort of, like, are we talking about like floods, those sorts of things?
Yeah, well, and that would be the sort of event, like the type of events that we plan for locally are more sort of weather related events. Every municipality in Ontario is required to do a hazard identification risk assessment on it, or to prepare that and update that on an annual basis. So locally, our HIRA focuses predominantly on weather-related events. So the larger one that we always tracks high are it's summer drought, like a weather event in the summer where again we have low water issues. In the spring, obviously seasonal flooding is
Right.
a major event. So I mean, this year I know you live in Ayr. Odds are it's going to flood again because it usually
Yeah.
floods, and those are the sort of things that municipalities usually plan towards, which are the things that are more, that are more frequent.
Right. So, and you mentioned, just as a quick aside, I mean, for people to realize, our drinking water is from groundwater, basically, right? The aquifers down below. So when we're in a drought situation, that's the concern with respect to those water levels.
Yeah, and that's why we have watering bans and so on. And I think we've been quite good at sort of maintaining our water supply over the summers. But yeah, you're correct that we do, we are heavily reliant on groundwater. Mannheim takes from the river and recharges, but we are heavily, we're a landlocked community, so we rely heavily on groundwater, and that's not a finite resource at a time when if we had an extended drought.
Yeah. So prior to SARS, and that's sort of the focus of things. And then SARS, what date are we talking about? What year are we talking about?
2003.
Yeah. So 2003, as we said, you said that SARS becomes a significant issue. Well, Toronto, and it's not far from Waterloo region. Now, what do you do at the Region of Waterloo now? How are we prepared for something like that?
Yeah. So we were charged with planning for a pandemic type event. And it was over a number of years that we did the work. The lead on the work was at that time our medical officer health, Dr. Leona Nolan, who did a terrific job of leading the project. There were a large group of stakeholders, probably 150 or so, or it was a couple hundred people that were brought together to sort of work together very collaboratively to develop this plan. There were 6 working groups that were given very specific parts of the plan to develop. I was tasked with the communications, the emergency communications component of the plan, and we were sent away to do our work. And then it was ultimately, or later on, bundled together as a plan. And I was co-chaired by Luann Proctor in public health, and my at that time colleague Beth Rowland worked with me on that at the local level. We brought together the communicators from the broader public sector locally, school boards, hospitals, universities, and so on. And that was the group that developed that component of the plan that I was most intimately involved with, although there were other parts of the plan that I was pulled into as well.
So there must be a timeline going on, because SARS is going on in Toronto. We're doing our thing. Like, is there a bit of a panic in the sense of we've got to get something put together quickly?
No, we were given guidance to go down this path. I think in 2004, there were a number of phases to the plan. We did a sort of a broader framework document in 2006. We did a lot of work into 2007 and 2008. So we took the time when we weren't in a crisis situation to actually do some really good planning, and there was significant consultation with a whole range of stakeholders. The plan was signed off by a whole range of organizations, not just governmental, but some of the community organizations like hospitals and so on. And it was a highly collaborative, very substantive document. I've got it with me here. I borrowed a copy. It's about an inch thick, and I think it's held up very well to this day.
So, okay, so this is post-SARS, but I'm just wondering, pre this though, like SARS is there. What are we doing at the region to be prepared for a possible, SARS infiltration into our community, infection into our community?
Yeah, some of that I would have to sort of defer to public health, because that would be very specific to them. But overall, there was emergency planning done, and often, as I've said many times, when it comes to emergency planning, it's only about 10% of it is technical. It's 90% is the relationships that you have. And so we did, again, we all did planning locally. We had a regional emergency response plan that would have covered sort of a health related event. There were annual exercises. And I think the thing that really I draw from is that we all know each other well locally. We work well together. And again, some of the direction that we would get on a health related event would obviously come from the province and would be in the mandate of public health. But but I think 2003 was a wake up call, and that's why we commenced working on the pandemic plan. I
want to ask you though, just to step back. You said 90% of it is relationships.
Well, that's always been my view about these things. That yes, there's there's a lot of technical work done on emergency planning, but at the end of the day, it's knowing the right people to have in the room, to have those relationships, to have a high level of trust, to have a high level of cooperation, to work well together, to leave the egos at the door and look out for the best interests of the public. That's the part that I mean. That's the important 90%.
So it's like having a good organization in place. People know who's responsible for what and where to go to get the information you need and where to move to the next spot, we'll say, for that information to flow.
Yeah, it's really having clear roles and responsibilities.
So we had that at that time.
Yeah. During
the time of SARS.
Yeah, and beyond.
Okay. Yeah, and beyond. We'll talk about beyond. So okay. So fortunately, we didn't really have a significant issue to deal with. H1N1 was around what time would H1N1 have been an issue of concern?
It was 08, 09 in that period, and that was a flu strain, and we had mass clinics at that time to deal with it. So it
Right.
was just
But
it
we
was
won't get to that yet. I just wanted
yeah,
to set the time perspective. So
yeah.
now we get by SARS. We kind of realize everything is we're fortunate in our community, and it somehow ended, which would be nice to see COVID end the same way, I'd say. But so you mentioned the province had set down some guidance. What was this something from their experience with SARS that they started to work with municipalities on?
Well, I believe that they, again, again, have to defer to public health on what specific guidance they got, they received or received locally. But we were given a very clear direction to start planning towards a pandemic type event. And then we were given some latitude, obviously, locally to develop that plan. There wasn't just one plan that the province said, here's the plan for every
Right.
municipality in Ontario, because obviously every municipality is different. And the plan
Yep.
that we have is very much reflective of this of Waterloo region.
So reflective of Waterloo region with its two-tier government, was that an issue, or that just worked out okay? I mean, that's something that it's always fun to throw in the two-tier issue on these discussions.
Yeah, no, and again, I'm jumping, ahead a bit to the plan itself, but it did acknowledge the roles that both the region and the area municipalities have.
Yeah.
For example, and the reason that that we bring together the regional control group is to bring together both the political and the administrative leadership into one room. And so there, just to be clear, that the pandemic control group, and I'll sort of speak specifically to that, is again the regional chair, the area mayors, and the CAOs. And what happens at that, and other people as well. But what happens at that table is that it facilitates cross municipal cooperation and collaboration. So when you deal with and there are a number of control groups, and there is actually a municipal sector control group as one of the control groups that's part of that gets the CAOs together to deal with really the operational issues. So it's sort of implicit, or not very, it's very explicit in the plan that
Right.
there's a role for again, for regional government and for the area municipalities. The one part that I can speak to that's specific to the chapter in the communications plan is there's a business cycle that we've got, a clock that we've got that talks about when groups meet, and in relation to the direction from the feds to province, locally, and so on. And right. In the communications business cycle, there is a time that is set aside for the regional, the medical officer of health, regional CAO, regional chair to brief the media. Following that, there's a specific part of that business and that communication cycle for the area municipalities. So this plan was always conceived to sort of recognize that, in this case, Karen Redmond would have something to say about issues at the regional level,
Right.
but Barry Rabanovic would have something to say about something or Dave Jaworski or whoever at the city level, and that was baked into the plan as part of the clock.
Let me just ask you on that, because it's jumping ahead. We're going to go back in a minute, but just on that point, when I think about the COVID press conferences, I can't recall, did the city have their own separate press conferences? Is that what you were sort of suggesting by that?
They didn't, because of the nature of COVID, but they did issue their own media releases on their own. I mean, I'm not sure, I can't, if they did that sort of thing, but
Right.
but there was a place, like what we did during COVID was we coordinated media releases between the region and the area municipality. So often we would send them out at the same time, or if there were services that were really specific, like arenas and so on, to the area municipalities, we would work with them, but they would send them out separately. But the what's very I would call it eerily prescient is that we in the communications chapter sketched out what a day would be like during a pandemic, with the media briefings, where they would take place, who would be there, the nature of the material that was shared. And this was something that we did as a planning exercise, back in a dozen years ago, and it reads almost like exactly what a day was like during the
Wow.
The most busy part of the first wave.
Let's go back to that. Let's segue then back to developing this plan. We sort of touched on it, but I'd like to get a little more specific. So post SARS now, you're working on developing this plan so you have it just in case for any future pandemic situation. How are you going about doing that? Like what's happening in terms of developing the plan? What's the process that you guys used?
Well, there was a broader steering committee, but the heavy lifting was done by a half a dozen working groups, and they dealt with a whole range of issues that related to the health sector, regarding immunization, regarding something that was euphemistically called surge in natural death. We dealt with everything right down to pets and volunteers and so on. So it was a very complex document, but there were a number of sector groups that went away and did that work, and again brought that back together. I was tasked with the role of shaping the communications component of the plan, the chapter that relates to crisis communications. We had brought together the broader public sector communicators from across the region, again from the hospitals, universities, school boards, and so on. And in order to make it a productive and meaningful exercise for everyone, we had gone out and we'd done some research and found the top 15 or 20 pandemic plans from across, globally. So we'd found a good one from Auckland, New Zealand. There were some from Europe, some from the US, some from other parts of Canada.
Right.
So everyone was assigned 2 plans to take away and become subject matter experts in those two plans, and then to come back to the broader group prepared to sort of share what they found as sort of best practices there. And it created a high level of buy-in. It gave us some really good information. And I think that step served us very well. And I think everybody felt that, it's hard to be an expert in everything, but I think in the case of being assigned a specific focused role, I think it gave us some really good information.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is we're not just talking about like communicators from municipal government or regional government. We're talking about people in the field, in your case with your committee, people in the field that are also from social agencies and business as well, right? I mean, it's a broad range or scope of focus and people from different backgrounds that are coming together to put this together.
We didn't tap into business directly, but we did bring in, again, the broader public sector from across Waterloo region. So we had a really good group. Okay.
So tell me about, because you were telling me the story about the larger meeting that you had where you were going through an exercise. Was that part of this development of the pandemic plan?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we had a broad group of stakeholders that contributed to the preparation of the plan. And I remember we had a kickoff meeting out at RESTREC, the Regional Emergency Training Facility, and we had probably, I'd say, 150 of community leaders there, or people who were tasked with helping to draft the plan. And it was reps from a whole range of organizations. And I remember midday or towards the end of the session, we did a little exercise, and part of maybe I need to sort of go back a bit. That
give a little more background on it.
Yeah. One of the assumptions in the original plan was I wouldn't say it was apocalyptic, but there were a number of scenarios that were being that were written into the plan, and there were ones that were relatively inconsequential. There was serious, and then there was like a very serious pandemic event. Right. And the more serious scenario, the extreme scenario, had a 35% attack rate. That meant that people could potentially be off at any given time, either with health issues, with dealing with loved ones, family members, and so on. So we had a scenario where we could potentially be losing a significant number of key community leaders at a very critical point. So we did a little exercise where we had everybody do the 1, 2, 3, count themselves. Everybody numbered themselves in the room, and all the ones went to the one side of the room, leaving the 2s and 3s together as one group. And that was really to illustrate that if things got really bad, we would 1/3 of the people that were required to provide leadership in the pandemic could potentially not be around and not available to provide leadership. Right. And we had to be able to operate with the 2/3. And what really struck me that day was that I remember looking over at the group that had been sort of set aside as the group that potentially wasn't going to be available. And one of them was at that time Police Chief Larry Gravel. And I really thought, oh my God, it really hit home that if something like this happens, it's not going to, be selective or discriminate based on rank or who you were. It would affect everybody. But it really hit home that if we had to lose somebody as important as Larry Gravel, we really had to take planning seriously. And we did.
Yeah, I just want to, just thinking about this, I just want to stop for a second to reflect on a certain point. And it's the fact that, we elect people to public office, mayor, councilors, what have you. And, these are people from all various walks of life, largely many with no medical background, no emergency planning background. And now we're suddenly thrust into a situation where they have to make, in some cases, life and death decisions, significant health related decisions, leadership decisions in the community that, you might have watched this on a television show somewhere before, you've never experienced it yourself. And sometimes we forget that our quote political leaders, our community leaders are people that have not experienced anything like this before. And I'm not saying they're making it up as they go along, but they're doing the best they can with the information they have to make decisions for the best of for the community. It's a tough role to be placed in.
Yeah, but I also think too that those same elected officials count on their staff to actually have done,
right,
to do good work and provide solid leadership. And I think that when we went into, the current pandemic, we were fortunate. Like in this document, probably we were looking at updating it and so on, but then events got overwhelmed us. But you count on your staff to do good work. And this document at the time did make its way to the councils, was signed off by the mayors and so on. So the document did have a political sort of lens on it at the time. But overall, again, having been both a longtime staff person, but also having held elected office, you do count on your staff to do this work. And that's why we were very fortunate going into this pandemic that we actually had a document we could pull. Was it perfect? No. Was it good? Yes.
Yeah.
We had terrific leadership. I mean, Mike Murray, our CAO, my former boss, was
yeah. We'll get to that.
Yeah,
you're jumping ahead on all that. Yeah. But what I'm getting at is the difficulty for elected people to make decisions in these situations. And I agree, you're counting on staff and you're hoping that your staff is going to provide you with the best information. So it really speaks to, I guess, ensuring, that we invest in planning, but we also invest in staff to ensure that we have what we need to make sure the job is done. I always found it, having just been elected just for the 4 years, I always found it interesting, that role, because I relied on staff for, a lot of things, whether something had to be filed or not filed and all that. I wouldn't know a lot of that stuff. And so we had to count on them to make sure that those things were being done. So it's a heavy load they have as well. But ultimately, though, the decision-making authority rests with the elected politicians. And that's the heavy load that you bear in those situations.
It does, yeah. And I know this is jumping ahead, but the other factor now is that regional council is also the board of health. So regional councilors, again, we're multiple hats, but in the case of when it comes to an event like this, the mayors, sit on the control group, but regional council is the board of health. And they have, and you're seeing some action coming out of regional council with respect to advocating for certain, changes to the way the province is approaching pandemic, opening, closing locally and so on. But again, I think that's where, you have to rely on getting good advice. And Dr. Wong is outstanding locally. And I think you're going to get that good medical advice. But then when you get into situations like we have with the pull between business versus health and everything else, it's you got a lot. It's intense. It's intense. It is. But, the other part too, and not to take away from the role of our local elected officials, but in the first wave of the pandemic, a lot of the directives, and probably to this day as well, we were reacting to were coming out of Queen's Park, or sometimes federally, like with quarantine and so on. But a lot of what we were doing locally was that yes, there's an advocacy role. Yes, there are roles that are unique to this community, but a lot of it is and I remember the early days, and I'm jumping ahead. I'm not sure where you are on your clock.
Okay. I'll
but
bring you back.
bring me back. Yeah. But I just know that, every day there was another directive. And sometimes what would happen would be that we would get direction from the province at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then by the time we, scrambled to get ready, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it would change. Like
Yeah.
it was a very intense period of time when everybody was just reacting to, again,
Yeah.
this kind
So
of.
I don't know, like you and I don't know what the level of preparedness for a pandemic was at the provincial level. We know, what the level of preparedness was at the regional level because you've worked on it over a number of years. And even no matter how prepared you can be, there can always be so many different factors that come into play that just, I don't want to say throws the playbook out, but the playbook provides a sort of the structure, the bare bones. But what happens can really change things a fair bit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we had to be nimble. Um,
Yeah.
there were like decisions like when the House of Friendship had to close because they couldn't have the residents there so close together. We had to move to find a place to how when St. Mark's closed. A lot of the shelters in their sort of congregate
Yeah.
basis. Were like it was potential for a disaster, so we had to move quickly to house those people. And I think in that case, that was sort of the best of decision making. Instead of spending 2 months debating should we go here or should we go there, we made those decisions in days. And
Yeah.
and we again, we're fortunate that the Y was available. We took over the Radisson, or a lot of the Radisson Hotel for the House of Friendship group, and we made good decisions. But those were good local decisions. And when I
Yeah.
yeah, and
Well,
I think
that made me think of something. Let's jump back now for a
yeah,
second. So,
sure.
because it made me think of the Syrian refugee crisis and the Howard Johnson story that you had, for example, about having, using these larger facilities to when necessary. But let's just go back for a sec. So the pandemic playbook is developed. The pandemic control group that you mentioned previously, when did that start meeting as a group? Because you had the emergency control group all the way through. When was the pandemic control group something that was a regular?
Well, it was really actually in starting probably in February, March of this year. That's when we
Okay.
actually moved to that. That was a reaction to this to this current pandemic.
Okay. So back to the playbook. So the playbook is put together. Um, was it something that was needed when H1N1 was making its way around?
No, I don't recall it there. I think that we did the main role that public health at the time were to sort of organize those mass vaccination clinics, but it was essentially that was treated as a large, albeit very serious flu event, and it was dealt with through there. But it never resulted in needing to trigger a plan like this.
Okay. So we've got the playbook, you've got the emergency control group. Is it something that is the pandemic planning forming a part of a annual exercise prior to COVID at all in the region?
No, I can't say that we exercised. I think we did some work in '09 that I'm having my memory's not the greatest. I think we did have a bit of an exercise then, but it wasn't a plan that we exercised on an annual basis or on a regular basis.
Right. So, okay. So we've got this playbook, but let's jump now to the Syrian refugee effort, because, some people might say, well, what's that got to do? What do those two things have to do with each other? But there is a connection. So why don't you talk about, just first off, what the region was looking at with respect to the Syrian refugee effort?
Yeah. So if we, get into a little time machine and we go back to the federal election of 2015,
Yes.
At that point in time, the Syrian refugee crisis was, what was a high profile issue, was on the news every night, and the relative or the respective political leaders were putting out different numbers of Syrian refugees that Canada would take if they were elected as prime minister. And the Liberals under Justin Trudeau had put out a number of 25,000. So they were saying that, elect me and immediately we will welcome 25,000 Syrians to Canada. So on election night, and I was talking to my colleague Tara Bedard, who is the executive director of the Immigration Partnership. She and everybody else kind of went, holy crap, now we've got to actually, move on this very quickly. So Waterloo region was we received 1,800 Syrian refugees in a very short period of time. But even at that time, we didn't know how many we were going to get, but we just knew there was a lot. But we didn't. So there was no playbook for settling, many hundreds of refugees over a very short period of time. And I remember we had a number of meetings, and we were trying to kind of come up with a game plan. And I remember one night I thought, oh my God, it's the pandemic plan, because the pandemic plan was really geared to, at its essence, to bring together sort of regional resources with the community. So I remember grabbing a copy of the plan, going to, again,
Yep.
Mike Murray, my boss at the time, saying, I've got the solution is the pandemic plan. And Mike, and you had to know our relationship, looked at me like I had 16 heads, and kind of thought it's another crazy Bryan idea. So I remember.
Yeah, but hold on just one sec, though, just so everyone knows, it was a good relationship.
It was a good relationship. It was a very good relationship. But I was, Mike was the beneficiary, and hopefully he watches this and he'll smile that he also was the beneficiary of all my brilliant Bryan ideas. So Mike had the chapter on leadership that sort of outlined the framework. I remember him coming into my office at the end of the day with it and said, "This is it. This is our plan." So we, a lot of it wasn't relevant to settling newcomers, but the leadership structure, the roles, responsibilities, the fact that there was a robust chapter on volunteer coordination and so on. There was, it spoke to, public health issues and housing and so on. It really was a relevant framework document for
yeah, because that was a huge community effort. Now let me just clarify: the 1,800, that would be like, I know a lot of church groups and other organizations were putting together their efforts to sponsor families. Was that part of the 1,800, or were they over and above?
I believe they were over and above. It was, so we worked with the government, what we call them, GARS was the acronym, but government assisted refugees. There's the locally sponsored ones, and then there was another category which I won't get into. But there were, we were focused on on that group of newcomers, and on a day-to-day basis, we really didn't know, how many were coming. We'd hear, 20, 50, 30, whatever. But we did have to build a plan to accommodate them once they got here. But also the longer issue, or the bigger issue, was finding housing for them in the long term.
Right.
We were very fortunate to have strong leadership at Reception House. Bert Lobe was the executive director, or I'm not sure, CEO there when this all started. He was later replaced by Carl Cadogan, but we had terrific leadership from there. And really, we were working to, in the short term, remember these individuals were coming from, they'd been in camps, some of them for years. The kids hadn't been in school for years. There was complex health issues, the dental issues, the health issues. A lot of them were illiterate in their own language. So we had to get them, the kids into school. We had to start dealing with, ESL for the parents and so on. So there was a myriad of organizations that were there to bring things together. We had a terrific response from the community.
And just on that, Bryan, for a second. So the community would be like donating money, clothes, furniture.
Yeah.
All that. So you'd have to coordinate. Was the region coordinating all of that effort?
We were working with various agencies. I think we were working with MCC and a bunch of other agencies that was dealing with the physical coordination of it. One thing that we did very quickly was pull together a website, a portal for the community to find out what we needed to share. It was a way to sort of connect groups. And a local company, eSolutions, provided us with a template website at no charge. And our staff, again, led by Beth Rowland, took the lead in populating that. And we had that website up and running in about 3 days. And if anyone's ever done a website, that was like warp speed to get that going. But that was the timeline that we were operating under. And so the first larger place that we started to bring people into was the Howard Johnson's, now the former Howard Johnson's on Weaver Street.
Right. So this gets to my discussion earlier about now you've got this large facility because you have all these, the refugees are all coming in and you have to temporarily house them.
Yeah, but that was, again, truly that was a temporary solution. We were moving them through there as quickly as we could. And again, the stellar work done by Reception House. They were the folks working with our staff too. Like our housing staff were involved, but they were the, they had a major role there. But between regional housing staff and the folks at Reception House, we were finding housing. We had to find furniture. We had to find clothing. There was just so much that had to be done on a very tight timeline to get people into the right place, because it really wasn't, putting people up at a place like Howard Johnson's was not a good. It was better than probably being in a refugee camp in Syria, obviously.
Well, of course. So the pandemic playbook just played a role in terms of helping to coordinate sort of the structure for that.
Exactly. Yeah. And we did convene the emergency control, or the control group that is in this plan, on a number of occasions. So we did have, like, again, the mayors and the CIOs together. So when you needed to have cross municipal cooperation for, a myriad of issues, and I remember Dave Jaworski, the mayor of Waterloo, getting on the phone, and he knew some landlords that he had to build, and Dave, to his credit, picked up the phone and started making phone calls. So that's the level of leadership and support we got. And again, we did have a mechanism to bring everybody together.
So it's everyone working in their space, but in a coordinated manner, not in their space on their own. And it's not a left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, so to speak. It's everyone knowing what their hands are doing together.
That's what the plan was for. I mean, like, were we perfect? Probably no, but I think we did.
Of course.
But I think we did a good job locally with the Syrians. And I think right now, obviously, all newcomers, have a struggle to, get settled. But I think
totally understand that. I mean, my wife and I, my wife specifically was involved with a church group and brought over a family. Around that time, they were getting the money and housing and furniture together for a Syrian family. But at the time, it got capped at the 25,000, and they ended up bringing a family over from Eritrea. And lovely family. We still work with them quite a bit. I say I have 3 grandchildren now because of the work we do with them. But they had spent 7 to 8 years in a refugee camp prior too. So we just can't fathom what is going on in those situations. And it's nice that we're able to bring people to this country and help them to get settled. And Reception House does a great role in doing that. I know we're working with another family through Reception House that's renting in a property that we have, 8 people. And we were just so happy to have someone through Reception House because, just a plug for Reception House. They at times have found it difficult to find places, and hopefully more people open their homes and their hearts to assisting the families that they're helping out. But okay, let's move on now. Oh, hold on. You got to tell me about the time you were a dignitary at the Howard Johnson and bringing greetings.
Oh, this is a small story, but I remember I went there just to see what was going on and so on. And it was a bit of pandemonium because there, again, you had families, kids. It was a full house. And there was one when I was there that day, they gathered everyone, which is probably a couple hundred people, into what was the large ballroom there. And I remember Bert Lobe was the ED for Reception House at the time, and he was sort of coordinating a bit of a program. And I remember Bert saying, "Do you want to speak to the newcomer or to our Syrian friends?" And I said, no, I have no real. I'm only here to watch. I'm only here to observe. I'm not really planning to say anything. So we got sat at the front of the room, and it was pretty packed and pretty intense. And Bert, of course, starts to go through the program, and he said, "And now I'd like to introduce you to Bryan Stortz from the Region of Waterloo, and he's been very helpful." And then he turned over the podium to me, and thankfully, I did my best impersonation of Justin Trudeau and welcomed everyone. But also, I had experience in working through an interpreter because I'd done some work in Cambodia, so I was able to, again, understand the role of the interpreter, and everybody obviously
you got to pace yourself in those situations.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, it was a nice moment. Again, I think at that time too, just the level of very visible leadership that that our community showed was really outstanding. It was one of the the high points.
A very rewarding opportunity to give back in that way. Very special. I'm sure you've got fond memories of all of that. Okay, so we've developed the pandemic playbook. We've tested parts of it now. And so now we're dotting along in November, December of 2019. What are you doing?
2019. Well, we were starting to monitor. Everybody was monitoring what was happening in China, like the first cases in Wuhan and so on. And we had, I think, a few sort of early sort of wouldn't say false alarms on activity happening here. But one of the real critical times was on the 5th of March. We had our first local case, and that was a real wake up call for this community. That was it was a travel related case from Milan through Lisbon. Yeah, I remember that one very vividly. And so that's what got things going. And the other, I wouldn't say it was a small thing, but in the early part of March, aside from getting ready for the pandemic, we were also trying to get those very active students at Wilfrid Laurier University to not hold their St. Patrick's Day gathering on Ezra.
Yes.
So I remember that was one of the things that we were pushing out at that time, was try to get people to not gather and not have a super spreader event. But at that point in time, we started into the business cycle of like as staff, and we did our media briefings and so on. We got into that whole planning cycle and response cycle locally. And we were having, as we got into March, we were having 3 media briefings a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I did the first 9 of them. I did them until we went on Zoom, and then I turned them over to Julie Kalfleisch of Public Health, and again, Beth Rowland, who did a much better job than I at doing them, because I would have probably screwed up the technology. So we started into that. The other thing that was really key, and this is sort of a shout out to public health staff, is that we integrated the corporate communications team with the public health comms team. So we created one integrated team. There were 2 teams that were 3 days on, 3 days off, and I kind of sat in on all of the all the groups, and then we were there to really support Dr. Wong in her efforts. So it became a very, I guess, just to get back to your question, it became very, very serious, very intense, very quickly. The control group, I think, was meeting 3 times a week as well. There was just a lot of activity at that time because, we were a typical day, and I ultimately I moved to work from home, but you start at 7:30 in the morning and you'd wrap up at 10:30 at night. And it was really intense for that period of time.
So just one thing I've always wondered about, the press conferences were always around the same time as the Prime Minister's press conference, which I found a little frustrating on my part, because you want to catch what's happening locally, but you also wanted to find out what's going on nationally, right? So
we did ask the Prime Minister to change his time, but he didn't reciprocate on this one. No, the reason that they were at 11:30 was that the ministry released the results. The local results were public at 11 o'clock. So so what we wanted to do, and we did it, and it was very deliberate. We didn't want our results to be sitting out there, into the afternoon. So we wanted to, let the media see the results, so we knew what our cases were and all that, but also speak to them very promptly. So it just happened to be that we had a conflict with the Prime Minister, but we had a different audience, and our media briefings were obviously more compelling.
Absolutely. So the pandemic playbook, though, how did it overall come into play? Like, how, in terms of its application, was it, like, you've talked about the communication piece, what other pieces of it were part of this playbook?
Well, let me go through. I'm trying to find the right. I have this thing memorized, by the way. I know, page 18. So let me answer that by sort of describing a typical pandemic control group meeting. And what it would be that there would be, essentially it became a series of updates. So if there was some sort of major issue, of Mike Murray or whoever would take it off the top. But what happened, or what we got into, and there was a bit of a rhythm to it, is that so there was the pandemic control group, like the larger regional pandemic control group, but within that there were 5 other control groups that reported into the broader control group. So there was a health sector group, critical infrastructure, community support, communications, and a municipal one. So there's a municipal control group. So we would report into that control group. And What it was a opportunity that if I had an issue that I needed support from let's say the municipal control group, I would bring it to that forum, and then Dan Chapman from the city of Kitchener, City of Kitchener chaired that group. He would then take that away and they would work on it. Or if they had an issue from the municipal side, it would come to this group and then it would be assigned to us. So it was opportunity to facilitate a discussion. And let me just sort of make something very clear that the elected officials that were there, particularly the mayors, were there as mayors. They were not there as regional councils. They were councilors. They were there as mayors to represent their municipalities.
Right.
There is a group that has been meeting for a while now, which is the Board of Health, which involves all of regional council. But this was a chance for the region and the 7 area municipalities and the other partners. On the health side, we had on the health sector group, it was Dr. Wong from Public Health. It was Lee Fairclough from St. Mary's Hospital, and Sharon Ball, who's a primary physician from Cambridge, and they were the triad, and they would come with updates on what was happening on the health side. So it was a chance for us to again work within, and then what was happening behind the scenes is that in parallel with the broader control group, the other control groups were meeting as well. So I was chairing the communications control group, and other control groups were meeting. And again, I was the sort of the channel to report into the larger control group.
On the communication side, what did you find to be the most effective means for getting the message out?
We did a lot of social media, and because of in large part because of the timelines that we were working under. And so the region has about a 75,000 number of followers on Twitter. We got a big footprint. So we used our social media channels primarily, and that to help there. But the other part that we had, and I need to do a shout out to the local media, is our local media were to a person outstanding during that period. So when we did the media briefings, initially Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then we went down to 2, and now they've gone down to 1. They were well attended, and the local media did a fantastic job of getting the word out. And I was in having regular conversations with Jim Poling at the Record, with Kristen Weaver at CTV, James Sebastian Scott at 570. We were talking all the time at a senior level, because at that point in time, I would say that it was probably one of the finest hours locally for our local media, that they really did step up in the true spirit of public service. So, right. and so they were really good. And I know in talking to some of them, they said, well, we really don't care if we're getting the story first. Like, there's no competition here. We just want to make sure that the public knows what to do. And they were outstanding.
Kudos then for local media and the importance of local media, right? I mean, that's something that we're seeing, the decline in local media, but certainly social media. I mean, the decline sometimes happens because of the strength of social media. And like you said, you have 75,000 or so followers on your platform, and it's easy to get the message out quickly and immediately. Yeah. So were you charged with getting those messages out, or you would have someone assigned to get those messages out, or?
Well, I go back to the team the teams that we had that worked in rotation. So we had, again, 3 days on, 3 days on, 3 days off. And so that team, whatever team that was on would take the lead with getting the word out. And they would also be responsible for the media briefings. But we had an overall strategy. Again, we generated lots and lots of materials and messages and so on. But it was really that integrated team that did the heavy lifting. And also too,
one of the things that I think about, and again, this is not criticism, just observation, how there are a lot of different messages early on, because it was an evolving, and we're all learning and trying to understand, how is it transmitted? Is it through touching something on a table? Is it, speaking moistly, as the Prime Minister had said? And so there's issues like wear a mask, don't wear a mask. How did you find those sorts of things early on in terms of from a communication standpoint?
Well, a lot of what we were doing was really sharing what was coming from the province. So, and I agree that, with your observation that, it was confusing because things were changing, by the day. But to be fair, it was a like I think everybody was sort of, I wouldn't say making it up as they went along, but there were a lot of unknowns. And
Yeah.
even today, like I think today, the reason I think maybe the second wave was created less concern is that people kind of knew what they were getting into. But
Yeah.
if you remember back in the days and like in March and so on, when the stock market dropped by like 40%, we
Yeah.
were sending planes all over the world to bring Canadians back.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
mean, and we, there was a lot of, again, a lot of unknowns at that time. But what we tried to do, and the other group that I want to, again, mention are our area municipal partners that we work very closely with, the communication staff, again, people that were, and I guess mostly municipalities, but also part of the control group, that they were very good at helping us get the word out as well. So I think everybody, again, stepped up, and I think we had a really good plan locally to get the word out. And I gotta give a shout out to the Air News. I know that Irene is
Love the Air News.
I love the Air
I'm
News,
on record.
and the Woolwich Observer, and so we had great conversations with. It wasn't just the record and CTV, but we did have terrific involvement from our.
Yep.
And as you know, I've got a real soft spot in my heart for community weekly newspapers. So we
yes, we haven't even gotten to that. That's a future podcast. We haven't even
Exactly.
touched on that. Kitchener today. What is it? Kitchener
this week.
This week.
Yeah.
So we haven't even touched on any of that. So you had already retired though by time vaccination discussions were happening.
Yeah, and I should have said at the outset that I retired on the 30th of October. So that was just as they were getting into the second wave. So just to sort of, bookend my involvement, that, I was more of an observer on the second wave and the vaccine rollout efforts. But, I know like the people that they've chosen are very good. Deputy Shirley Hilton is, she'll do a stellar job, and they've got good people there. So I think
this wasn't about whether that's good or bad. I was just curious whether would the vaccination process have been something that was part of the playbook, the pandemic playbook at all?
Well, what was interesting was that when we went into the first wave of the pandemic, again, as I said, it needed some updating because it spoke to vaccination clinics and so on. At that point in time, there was no vaccine. So we were looking at other measures. But as time has evolved in the months have passed, there's a significant amount of the plan that is dedicated to vaccine rollout. So I don't know. Again, I can't speak for the current regime as to whether there was something here, but which is interesting is that the plan became, as COVID evolved, the plan actually became more applicable to the second wave, because the first wave we didn't have a vaccine.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, Bryan, we're at the end of our time today on this, and I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add to it regarding the topic of today.
No, I just think, again, I think a recurring theme that I've mentioned a couple of times is just what a great community we have and how great people are working together. And I think that it's I think you can have any document that you prepare, any kind of plan you prepare it, but that's just words on a page. But I think what we've seen on a number of things, and again, we've talked about COVID, we've talked about Syrians, is that at the end of the day, there's a tradition locally of working together and stepping up in times of need. And again, it makes you very makes you very proud to be part of this community.
So raising that barn together, right?
Exactly. No, it's as David Johnson, our famous former Governor General, says, there's something in the water locally. And I think when we get into major crises like this, it, for the large part, brings out the best in people. And I think and
that's what I was going to say. You've been blessed through your work and a number of crises that we've experienced in our community to see the best of us. So listen, we'll be back together again to talk about some other things. I got to hear about your bad old days while you're on council.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that. Thanks, Ryan.
Take care, Bryan.
Thank you.
So this has been another edition of the Old Grey Mayor's podcast. I want to thank you for having listened and tagged along with us. If you want to hear from someone in the community that you think would be an excellent guest for this podcast, let me know and we will be happy to try and make that happen. And if you really like what you hear, you can subscribe and be informed of future Old Gray Mare podcasts. Thanks again. All the best.